You're watching Beyond 100 Days. President Trump is putting the finishing touches to his State of the Union address.
Aides say the theme is national unity, which was slightly undermined by his critical tweet of a top Democrat just hours beforehand.
The speech will be carried live on all US television networks, and it'll be watched by millions of American voters. The Prime Minister has been in Northern Ireland promising there will be no return to borders of the past, whatever happens in the Brexit negotiations.
I'm determined to work towards a solution that can command broader support from across the community in Northern Ireland.
Also on the programme, actor Liam Neeson denies being a racist after telling a reporter he'd wanted to kill a black person because someone close to him had been raped by a black man. And the most popular egg in the world, the Instagram sensation, has been poached for a mental health awareness campaign.
Hello, I'm Catty Kay in Washington. Christian Fraser is in London. Tonight, the President will give his State of the Union address to the American people. He won't have a television audience this big again until the 2020 campaign is well underway. See this, then, as the kickoff for Donald Trump's re-election bid.
These addresses are part policy, part theatre, and this time the scene will be fascinating because sitting behind the President will be Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker who's just caused Mr. Trump the biggest political upset of his time in office. On the policy front, watch out for these themes: the border wall, of course, infrastructure spending, plans to tackle the HIV epidemic, what next with North Korea, and trade. Jane O'Brien is on Capitol Hill for us. And Jane, it will be interesting to see whether the President tailors his speech this evening to appeal to what is a considerably changed Congress.
It will indeed, but if his early tweets, as you mentioned, are anything to go by, it doesn't look very likely. He's still butting heads with Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful woman in the country, up against the most powerful man in the country, and she appears to be winning at the moment. And as soon as he mentions immigration, you can bet your bottom dollar that any effort, any attempt at conciliation or bipartisanship is probably going to go straight out of the window, because of course this speech takes place against the background of talks that are going on, just have 10 days left to go, over trying to reach a compromise over funding for his border wall. He's already dismissed them. It doesn't look likely they'll reach any kind of compromise that he can accept, which means, Christian, as you know, we could be heading for another shutdown in 10 days.
Let's hope not. Jane, as you said, a lot of this is theatre. Describe the scene for our viewers of Nancy Pelosi sitting behind Donald Trump, literally looking over the president's shoulder as he gives this State of the Union address. And next to her, there's going to be Mike Pence, the vice president.
I think there you have, in one image, the reality of divided government. You have a House that is now Democratic. You have a Senate that remains Republican. And in the middle, you have Donald Trump, who is accused by supporters and critics alike of sowing chaos between the two. So I think that is the quintessential image for 2019 and beyond. How can Donald Trump, one of the most divisive figures in American history, bring these two together? And I think the answer is he can't. Even senators in his own party are getting a little bit fed up with some of his antics, particularly over the border wall funding. But the issue is, who's going to blink first? And can anything really get done over the next 2 years? That in itself, even with things like infrastructure on the table, which both sides should agree on, looks very unlikely.
OK, Jane O'Brien on Capitol Hill for us. Thanks very much. Let's bring in Elizabeth Boomerla. She's the Washington bureau chief for the New York Times. Elizabeth, White House aides telling us during the course of the day that the theme is going to be unity. It's going to be bipartisanship. The president is going to take the high road. How long does that last?
Well, let's see what he says. They've been saying that for a couple of days now. But bear in mind that one of the authors of the speech tonight is Stephen Miller, who is the president's very hard right advisor, especially on immigration. So, and also you need to know that the president has, as one of his guests, family members of people who he says were killed by illegal immigrants. So this is not, I would say, a positive message or an optimistic message about immigration. We expect him to talk about the crisis at the border, which there's not real evidence of that, and to talk about, again, the dangers of immigration. So I think perhaps there'll be some phrasing from the president about, you know, the call for unity and coming together, but I think there'll be a very, very tough line on immigration.
People who are working with the president on his re-election bid are hoping that he takes something of a high road, if you like, that he does have this appeal to unity, because they think that helps his re-election chances better than just doing the hard line on immigration. I wonder, though, Elizabeth, having watched lots of these States of the Union addresses, whether it actually makes much difference to his campaign chances.
Who knows? I mean, these speeches, huge productions go on in newsrooms across Washington to cover these speeches, and many of them are forgotten. And don't forget about Trump. He has thought from day one that the way to win a re-election is to just keep his base close, very close. And there has been no evidence so far that he has reached out to the rest of the country, to independents, maybe to some Democrats. He has not shown any sign that he will do that. Previous presidents in this stage in their presidencies, when they were facing divided government, you know, they had just come off bad midterm losses, as President Trump has, did reach out and appeal to unity. But again, let's see. Maybe there'll be some lines in the speech tonight, but let's see what Trump does afterward in his tweets afterward.
Elizabeth, the reason we're so interested on this side of the Atlantic is very often these State of the Union addresses are signals to outside countries. So what should we be looking for here in Europe?
I would be interested to see what he says about Brexit and about trade. I think he will warn yet again about the dangers, about the dangers of these unfair trade agreements. I do think he will certainly talk about North Korea. We're ready for some kind of an announcement about where the summit will be. So I think people in Europe should look for that. I think traditionally presidents reach out to the European allies. President Trump, as you know, has not shown a great inclination to do that. He's gone to war with many of the European allies, rhetorically speaking. So I think it'd be very interesting to see what he says about trade.
And he is expected to talk about so-called Islamic State. He has in the past declared victory over IS. He is taking some heat at the moment from even his own side on that.
Yes, you can look at maps of Syria and Iraq and see that ISIS is not defeated, as the president has claimed. And interestingly, he has stopped claiming that in the last couple of days as he's come under heat for that. And now he's talking about, the Defense Secretary Jim Mattis resigned because of Trump's very abrupt decision on Twitter to withdraw American troops from Syria. The Defense Secretary resigned over that. And now Trump is backtracking a bit by saying, well, some of those troops will go into Iraq, to neighboring Iraq, and perhaps fight ISIS from there.
Elizabeth Boomer, thank you very much. Always good to get your thoughts. Let's just return to the people who were sitting alongside the First Lady tonight, Catty. There is a young man called Joshua Trump who has been invited. There he is. And he has been bullied in school due to his last name, which is sad. And bullying is awful. And it's rightly an important issue that is being addressed tonight. But it is a bit of chutzpah from the White House to pick bullying as an issue, isn't it? When this is the man that calls Chuck Schumer crying Chuck, or Crooked Hillary, or Denang Dick, or Pocahontas lying Ted. I mean, he is the king of bullying.
I think some of that's being pointed out here in the pre-State of the Union coverage. Of course, any 11-year-old boy that's being bullied because of their name, that is awful. He moved schools and still carried on getting bullied. On that immigration point, there are, as you say, there are guests from both sides. The president has guests. Other Republican senators have guests. A couple whose son was killed in a car crash, and it's an undocumented immigrant who has been charged with that. But there is also a Democratic senator who is bringing as his guests a mother and a daughter who was separated in those camps on the border for 2 months. A perfect illustration of where the two sides are on this question of immigration, and a perfect illustration of how difficult it's going to be to have that kind of unity and bipartisanship that the President may talk about during the course of his speech. Let's talk about British politics now. It's hard to know what Theresa May is thinking or to predict what she might do next. But at a meeting with business people in Northern Ireland this afternoon, she gave us a clue. I am not proposing a deal that does not contain that insurance policy, she said. I am proposing changes. She was referring, of course, to the Irish backstop, the arrangement that might kick in if trade talks haven't progressed to prevent a hard border on the island.
There are some in her party who want that backstop completely removed, and in London there are 3 days of talks underway to discuss alternative arrangements. But these latest comments might suggest that when the PM returns to Brussels on Thursday, she's still leaning towards the original deal while seeking legal assurances from the EU. Well, earlier today in Belfast, Theresa May sought to reassure residents and business leaders.
I know that the prospect of changing the backstop and reopening the withdrawal agreement creates real anxieties here in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, because it is here that the consequences of whatever is agreed will most be felt. I recognise too that the majority of voters in Northern Ireland voted to remain, and that many will feel that once again decisions taken in Westminster are having a profound and in many cases unwanted impact in Northern Ireland and Ireland. So I'm determined to work towards a solution that can command broader support from across the community in Northern Ireland.
The BBC's Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy joins us now. To what extent did the Prime Minister's... Go ahead. Here she is.
Theresa May is having to navigate her way through a difficult set of circumstances here in Northern Ireland, because on the one hand there were many people in the business community who were supporting the withdrawal agreement in its original form, supporting the backstop as it was, seeing that as a guarantee that would help them continue trading much as they do today. And on the other hand, you have the very firm opposition to the backstop and the withdrawal agreement from Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party and the Brexiteers, who hold the balance of power at Westminster. So Theresa May was here in Belfast today explaining to business leaders exactly why she'd had to make that U-turn on the backstop, why she couldn't have got the deal in its current form through Parliament.
Emma Vardy there in Belfast. We're joined by Stephen Kelly from Belfast, the Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. Stephen, it's very good to have you with us. I know you've just finished a private meeting with the Prime Minister in Northern Ireland, so what sort of assurances did you get?
Well, we were greatly relieved, I think, from our engagement with the Prime Minister. She was very engaged in the conversation with us, taking notes. She clearly understands the deep problems that Brexit brings to this part of the world. With the UK deciding to leave the customs union and single market, it does require special arrangements here on the island of Ireland to ensure the way of life that we've enjoyed for the last 20 years can continue.
We are 7 weeks away from Brexit Day. I would imagine even now your members are starting to feel the pain of this because there is a lack of clarity on import and export arrangements. How does that affect orders?
Well, Brexit is here. That's the reality here in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure it's the same across the UK. We have some businesses whose customers are moving elsewhere. We have some businesses whose customers have sent lorries north in order to collect some product to ensure that it's not locked on the wrong side of the border should this Brexit negotiation go wrong over the next 52 days. So Brexit is a real life on the ground issue that our firms are facing day and daily, and I'm sure that's the case for businesses right across the UK.
Stephen, I'm sure the Prime Minister told you she doesn't want this to happen, but if over the course of the next 7 weeks it is impossible to get some kind of agreement that she can get majority support for, and we leave the European Union with no deal, what impact does that have on your members?
Well, it's potentially catastrophic for the Northern Ireland economy and the consequences that flow with that for communities right across Northern Ireland. Our businesses aren't prepared. We've had no advice from HMRC for those firms that trade across the border. Our firms are not in a position to actually deal with the consequences of a no-deal Brexit, and it's not their fault. They don't want to be in this position. They don't want to be in a position that means that they're going to have to let staff go because they've lost customers, or they've become uncompetitive because of tariff and non-tariff barriers.
And do you think that pain, can you quantify how long that pain would last for, or do your businesses think that they would be able to adjust after a period, say, of a few months?
No is the short answer. So with us today we had representatives from our dairy industry. Their estimate is that within 3, no more than 4 days, milk will no longer be able to be collected from farms, because access to the all-island market, access to international markets will mean that the milk just simply isn't required at the processing plants. So this is going to come as a really quick, sharp shock, not just to our firms and businesses here in Northern Ireland, but the rollout in terms of the cost of living in the rest of the UK will have a major significant impact on every constituency represented in Parliament.
Stephen, the Prime Minister has said, and I'm sure she just said this to you in the last hour, that she's not going to allow a hard border to return in Ireland. So if there is no deal, is she therefore saying to you that there will only be one if the EU imposes one?
Well, that may well be the case. From our perspective, it doesn't matter if the UK or the EU slam the door in our face, we're still dealing with a broken nose. And if one of the scenarios that we have here is that the UK may just decide to throw open the door, inviting the rest of the world to come in and punch us in the face and still breaking our nose. For business, the only thing that matters is how do we fix that problem that we have at that point in time. So we need to make sure we get a deal, regardless of who is to blame or otherwise is irrelevant for businesses. They want to make sure they've got money to pay people this Friday and every Friday up to and beyond the 29th of March next year.
Stephen Kelly joining us there from Belfast. Stephen, thank you so much for your time this evening. The Hollywood actor Liam Neeson has denied he's racist after finding himself at the centre of a global media storm. Earlier, in an interview to promote his latest film, he described how 40 years ago, when someone close to him had been raped by a black man, he then set out to kill an innocent black man in revenge.
He says he quickly came to his senses and was appalled by his behaviour, and that it was not motivated by racism. Our New York correspondent Nick Bryant has more.
After his explosive comments about rape, revenge and race.
Mr. Neeson, are you sorry for what you said?
Liam Neeson arrived at this Manhattan television studio not to make an apology, but to offer an explanation.
I'm not racist.
He admitted to setting out to kill an innocent black man nearly 40 years ago after someone close to him was allegedly raped by a black man.
Would you have had the same reaction if your friend had said it was a white man? Would you want her to go out and kill?
Definitely. If she'd have said an Irish, or a Scot, or a Brit, or a Lithuanian, I know I would have had the same effect. I was trying to show honour to stand up for my dear friend in this terrible medieval fashion. And I'm a fairly intelligent guy, and that's why it kind of shocked me when I came down to earth after having these horrible feelings. Luckily, no violence occurred, ever. Thanks be to God.
What makes you think you can kill a man?
I read it in a crime novel.
Promoting his new movie, the theme of which is murderous revenge, the actor had given an interview telling how he'd sought retribution after hearing about the rape.
What colour were they? She said it was a black person. I went up and down areas with a cosh, hoping I'd be approached by somebody. I'm ashamed to say that. And I did it for maybe a week, hoping some black would come out of a pub and have a go at me about something, you know, so that I could kill him.
There's been outrage at those remarks, but not universal condemnation.
Wow, I'm just shocked. I couldn't believe he would say something like that. I thought he was a good guy.
It makes you have a little bit of fear, but we have to push through that and find the love.
For Liam Neeson, today was supposed to be about promoting his new movie, but instead, he's trying to salvage his reputation. The 66-year-old has been one of Hollywood's more bankable stars. Will he face a backlash at the box office? Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Interesting this, Christian. A lot of people talking about it, a lot of detractors, some supporters. We, on the programme yesterday, spoke about a politician here, the governor of Virginia, also in a position of having to defend himself and say, I'm not a racist. Here in 2019, we also now have Liam Neeson, major box office star, effectively having to do the same thing and do a clean-up job.
Yeah, I don't think we can understand as white people how black people would feel listening to those comments, and plenty of them have attacked him today. I think the only thing is that some of them have been putting it in context that, different to the Virginia governor, this wasn't found in a Twitter feed or in his yearbook. He volunteered this information in an interview because he felt so uncomfortable about it. And I guess that's the point he's been trying to make on ABC today. The ultimate verdict, of course, will be when Cold Pursuit opens at the box office on Friday. It's had really good reviews, and if there aren't many people watching it, then of course Hollywood is going to act.
Yeah.
Let's turn to that awful fire in Paris that engulfed a residential building during the night, killing 10 people. It was started, we're told, deliberately.
Yeah, they've arrested, by the way, a woman who lived there. At least 30 other people have also been injured in the blaze. Richard Galpin has the story.
This deadly fire broke out after midnight local time. The flames spreading from the lower floors to the top of the apartment block. High up amid the flames, firefighters battled to reach those stuck inside their apartments and people who'd fled to the roof. Climbing the outside of the building, their only option, as the fire engines could not get into the immediate area. And while the rescue teams managed to get many people out, there have been a lot of casualties and others left deeply traumatised.
The alarm went off at 12:30 and it was already black with smoke. I live on the 8th floor, the top floor, so I tried to pass from balcony to balcony in order to get away. And then we huddled up in a corner and other people climbed up to where I was to escape the flames.
The operation to put the fire out continued throughout the night, with more than 200 firefighters called in to get it under control. And it wasn't long before the authorities announced that the blaze may not have been an accident.
From the information we have, the fire is being investigated as a criminal act. One person who lives in the building has been arrested. She was arrested during the night, not far from the scene, and she is currently in custody.
According to an eyewitness who spoke to the BBC, the woman has psychiatric problems and had got involved in a row last night, allegedly threatening to start a fire. What has happened here will come as a shock for those living in this upmarket part of Paris, which has not only left a growing number of people dead, but also dozens injured, including some of the firefighters. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Oh, shocking scenes there from Paris. Let's look at other news from around the world. Jose Mourinho has accepted a one-year prison sentence for tax fraud, but he won't actually have to go to jail. Instead, it will be exchanged for a fine of just over €180,000, which will be added to a separate fine of €2 million. The former Man U manager's deal with prosecutors is part of a wider investigation into alleged tax evasion by footballers in Spain.
UN Refugee Agency Special Envoy Angelina Jolie has visited camps in Bangladesh for Muslim Rohingya refugees from Myanmar. The Hollywood actress condemned the world's failure to prevent a crisis that saw 730,000 people driven from their homes as she addressed a crowd of people in the world's largest refugee settlement in Bangladesh, known as Cox's Bazar district.
The German museum displaying Banksy's self-destructing painting has deactivated the artwork's shredding device. Love is in the bin, shredded in its frame immediately after selling for £860,000 at Sotheby's auction house in London in October. Banksy has since suggested that the entire canvas was supposed to shred, not just 2/3 of it, but the museum says it wants to prevent the rest of the artwork from being destroyed.
Yes, that was a social media sensation. So too was
this one.
egg. Do you remember the egg, the plain and simple egg, which became the most liked picture on Instagram, more famous than Catty? You remember it? Okay. Well, it has 10 million followers, and now it talks, and it has a very positive message about mental health.
Kristen, you know it doesn't actually really talk, right? Let's just clarify that. Before the egg, the most popular post on Instagram was a photograph of Kylie Jenner holding hands with her baby. The egg took her record in just 9 days, but then a number of follow-up photos were added with the egg looking, well, more and more damaged.
Oh, yeah. Well, it all became clear on Sunday when the streaming service Hulu played this ad during Sunday's Super Bowl coverage. Good,
Christian?
Yeah.
That is a cracking story.
Cracking story, cracking idea by 3 PR executives in London who came up with this.
In their mid-20s.
You know, we were talking about
mid-20s, these
influencers
guys.
the other day. We were talking about influencers and how much power they have on social media. 10 million. They could do whatever they want with that now. They can apply it to mental health. They can target it at something else.
Why didn't we think of an egg? Why did we do a news show? We could have just done an egg.
Catty, we're wasted. We should be doing something like this. Instead, we're presenting Beyond 100 Days from the BBC.
Coming up for viewers on the BBC News Channel and BBC World News, President Trump made several pledges in his first State of the Union address 1 year ago. But did he actually keep with them? Stay with us for that.
Hello there. Plenty to talk about in Europe at the moment, with 2 areas of low pressure producing some issues. One winding its way in off the Atlantic. That's going to be bringing some wet and windy weather across the UK and then travelling further east. Another is down in the southeast Mediterranean. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Sandwiched in between the two, a good deal of fine, dry weather across northern Italy, the Alps, up into central Europe and down across Portugal and Spain. But another area of low pressure will bring some stormy weather across parts of Turkey and Greece. Weather warnings have been issued here, and it will stay pretty windy with it as well. But as you can see, through much of the western Mediterranean, it's fine, settled and sunny. There'll be some rain pushing into the northwest of France and a fair amount of cloud here too. But it's a southwesterly breeze, so it's much milder than it was a week ago. Pretty stormy weather conditions continue to track their way eastwards across Scandinavia. It'll be quite windy with it as well. Gales could be an issue. And at the same time, we will continue through central and eastern parts of Europe to see a good deal of fine weather, but still quite stormy through the southeast Med. So there is plenty going off at the moment. The city forecast for the next 5 days shows a slightly milder but unsettled theme across London and Paris. As for Eastern Europe, it stays quiet but cold for Moscow. That's it. Take care.
Making every journey personal. Singapore Airlines, a great way to fly.
En el ruedo hay un peligro constante porque te enfrentas a un animal que es un toro bravo con 4 años y medio, con 500 a 600 kilos, que su único objetivo es matarte.
लोक जेव्हा आम्ही कॉलवरती जातो ना तर लोक असं रिस्पेक्टफुली वागतात अरे लेडीज आणि ती पण फायर फायटर कधी कधी तर विचारतात पण अरे फायर ब्रिगेडमध्ये लेडीज असं प्राऊड फील होतं की लोक चांगला विचार करतात.
Eu me sinto extremamente empoderada estar numa profissão onde é considerada masculina. Eu consigo mostrar para a sociedade que lugar de mulher é onde ela quiser.
The State of the Union is back on. After a bruising government shutdown, President Trump will deliver his address to Congress and the world. From the US economy to foreign policy, he will lay out his priorities for the year ahead. We will bring you full coverage and analysis here on BBC World News.
Coming up on Hard Talk, I'm in Florida to meet the hugely successful writer Carl Highest. His darkly comic novels portray a Florida being strangled by greed, corruption and environmentalism. So how does reality compare? Watch Hard Talk.
This is Beyond 100 Days. I'm Katty Kay in Washington. Christian Fraser is in London.
Our top stories. In a few hours' time, President Trump will take the short car ride from the White House to the Capitol and deliver his State of the Union speech. But what's the secret to a successful speech? We'll speak to someone who worked with President Bill Clinton on crafting some memorable lines.
And coming up in the next half hour, as Theresa May promises no return to borders of the past, we ask one of the architects of the peace process in Northern Ireland if Brexit undermines his work. And the first trip by a pope to the Arabian Peninsula. But will the visit help bring peace to Yemen? Tonight, President Trump will address Congress and the rest of the world about his priorities for the year ahead. It'll be his second State of the Union address, so what better time to look back on the pledges he made last time?
Did he keep them, or might we be hearing more this year? Our correspondents have been looking back at what he said on the Iran deal, infrastructure, and the so-called Islamic State group.
The state of our union is strong because our people are strong. But there is much more work to be done. We will continue our fight until ISIS is defeated.
Fast forward to December 2018, when President Trump tweeted that the US would be pulling troops out of Syria, saying that ISIS had been defeated.
And we have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land.
Many experts and officials dispute that statement. While ISIS has lost much of the territory it held in the Middle East, it still has a large presence in Syria and Iraq, with an estimated 30,000 fighters. And at the start of this year, ISIS claimed responsibility for a deadly explosion in the Syrian city of Manbij.
I am asking Congress to address the fundamental flaws in the terrible Iran nuclear deal.
So what fundamental flaws is he talking about? Well, the deal is narrowly focused on Iran's nuclear program and doesn't include other possible threats.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Yes, he kept his promise, and he's made it part of a broader policy to counter what he calls Iran's malign and terrorist activity. But pulling out of the deal has also damaged U.S. credibility because, in fact, Iran was and still is sticking to its terms. It has strained relations with America's European allies because they helped negotiate the accord and are sticking with it. And critics argue ditching a carefully crafted arms control agreement makes the Middle East less stable, not more.
Tonight, I'm calling on Congress to produce a bill that generates at least $1.5 trillion for the new infrastructure investment that our country so desperately needs.
Infrastructure investment wasn't a new idea for Donald Trump. He talked about it relentlessly on the 2016 campaign trail and promised new bridges and roads and tunnels and airports in his inaugural address. The $1.5 trillion price tag in his State of the Union, however, was new, but since then he's done almost nothing to make it a reality.
We're going to rebuild America's crumbling infrastructure.
Congressional legislation has been non-existent. And while infrastructure investment is something that traditionally both parties can agree on, there seems to be very little interest in bipartisan cooperation right now.
So, public service announcement, do not believe that everything that you hear in a State of the Union address under any president is actually going to make it into reality. One person who's witnessed many of these addresses over the years is the former US Defense Secretary and Republican Senator William Cohen. He joins us now in the studio. Bill, thanks very much for coming in to join us. I want to start with this row between President Trump and his intelligence chiefs over the state of the world. To what extent is that going to hang over whatever assertions President Trump makes tonight on big issues like Iran, Islamic State group, North Korea, because people know that he's not on the same page as his intelligence chiefs? Is that a problem for him?
It's a big problem. It's a big problem because any president depends upon having good intelligence in order to shape policy. Now, when the president says, I disagree with my entire intelligence community, what he in effect is doing is undercutting their credibility and also signaling to them, don't bring me any bad news. Don't bring me any news or any intelligence that isn't consistent with my views. That will put us in greater danger to the extent they start cutting back or hedging or trying to please the president. There's an old Socratic dialogue in which Plato or Socrates asks, is beauty pleasing to the gods because it's good, or is it good because it's pleasing to the gods? And the question here, is the intelligence good because it's pleasing to the president, or is it pleasing to the president because it's good? And so these issues, I think, are very dangerous for the intelligence community in terms of shaping our policies depending upon individual whim and not upon the intelligence coming out, and then demoralizing the intelligence community, and then making individual decisions without the basis of knowing what the intelligence community is saying.
Well, let's talk about one specific area, and that is ISIS. There's been a lot of disagreement about that recently. Today, General Votel, who is the head of CENTCOM, was up on Capitol Hill hours before the State of the Union address. Here is what General Votel had to say about the situation with so-called Islamic State.
The fight against ISIS and violent extremists is not over, and our mission has not changed. The coalition's hard-won battlefield gains can only be secured by maintaining a vigilant offensive against a now largely dispersed and disaggregated ISIS that retains leaders, fighters, facilitators, resources, and the profane ideology that fuels their efforts.
What would you expect President Trump to say about the situation with so-called Islamic State and with US troops in Syria and whether they're going to withdraw, given how much pushback he's had over the last few days?
Well, I would say, I would predict or project that the president will say that we are determined to pull our troops out of Syria. I will do so on a condition-based basis, depending on what's happening on the ground, listening to what our military advisors are saying, but I'm still committed to removing the men and women. We'll do it on a basis in which it's safe for those who remain behind and consistent with my objective. I think that's the best you will probably hear from him.
Secretary Cohen, the first 2 years for Europe have not been altogether good. I'm just looking at my list here. The all but ruined Iran nuclear deal, tit-for-tat tariffs, global climate accord that's missing the world's largest economy, a possible arms race underway, a unilateral retreat from Syria without even a courtesy call. Will there be anything more positive for Europe in this speech tonight?
Well, it's hard to say whether it'll be more positive. I think the purpose of a meeting such as this, the State of the Union, is to inform and also to inspire. Unfortunately, over the years, long before President Trump took office, but some of these messages have turned more into spectacle than into a substantive projection of where we are as a nation. And so you'll have people standing up and cheering, you'll have others sitting down looking stone-faced. The irony is that the Republicans normally would be very supportive of the president on Syria. They'll probably not be cheering on that. And the Democrats, who like the notion that we're bringing our troops home, don't like the way in which he's done it. So it'll be a mixed reaction that he will get on their feet, with the members trying to decide whether to support him or applaud him. But I think overall the policy has been really mixed from my perspective. I don't agree with the way in which the situation was handled with North Korea. To the extent that the president says he's going for a second meeting, that is problematic in terms of how much progress they've made to date. But I think overall it's been very mixed for the president.
Secretary Cohen, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who are insomniacs, that State of the Union address is at 2 a.m. London time. I'll be anchoring all of our coverage of it, so I'll see you then.
I'll tune in.
Today, Theresa May. Thank you. Theresa May reiterated her commitment to the principles of the Northern Ireland Peace Treaty, the Good Friday Agreement, a day after one of the agreement's chief negotiators, Lord Trimble, announced that he might initiate a legal challenge against her government for breaching it.
So, why is the 1998 Good Friday Agreement so important to people in Northern Ireland? Well, let's remind you, it brought an end to over 30 years of violence. The two sides in Northern Ireland reached a compromise. Each community was to be treated on an equal basis. And since then, it's been held up as a model for establishing peace in other countries scarred by civil war. The agreement established an executive to deal with local issues, located, of course, in Belfast. And illegal paramilitary groups, all of them, agreed to destroy their weapons. Prisoners being punished for violent crimes connected to the Troubles were released early.
Anyone from Northern Ireland who wanted it would be granted dual British and Irish citizenship, and there would be a return to peacetime security arrangements without border infrastructure.
Well, a little earlier we spoke to Jonathan Powell, who was the chief British negotiator of the Good Friday Agreement. Jonathan Powell, the Good Friday Agreement was intended, in one sense, to bring a close to a Cold War between North and South. There is a suspicion in the Unionist community in Northern Ireland now that if the backstop was triggered, it would give a greater say, greater power to Dublin over Northern Ireland affairs. Would that be dangerous?
I don't think that's actually their real concern with the backstop. I think their concern with the backstop, and it's a legitimate one, is that since there has to be a border, if we're going to have a different customs system and a different regulatory system, the border can either be between Ireland North and South or in the Irish Sea, and the Unionists object to it being in the Irish Sea because they don't want to be cut off from the United Kingdom. I think it's a perfectly legitimate point. I don't think they really fear that the Republic of Ireland is going to have a greater say. They may well fear that the EU will have a greater say, but not that Dublin will.
Jonathan, how big, you worked on the negotiations, how big a threat do you think Brexit and specifically the prospect of leaving with no deal with the European Union is to that agreement?
Well, I think the main threat to the Good Friday Agreement is a hard border, because you have to remember that the Good Friday Agreement was about identity. We couldn't agree on whether people wanted to be in the United Kingdom or United Ireland, so they can live in Northern Ireland and they can be Irish or they can be British or they can be both. And as soon as you put a hard border back in, whether it's through a hard Brexit or whether it's because we ditched the backstop, then we're going to have a problem. It will undermine the whole basis of the Good Friday Agreement and all the work that we've done over the last 30-odd years to get to a lasting peace in Northern Ireland.
So do you think that some people on the Brexit camp who have perhaps been pushing for a hard Brexit have come to the realisation that because of the Good Friday Agreement, they're not going to get the Brexit they wanted?
I think that's right. I mean, if you remember, John Major and Tony Blair went and campaigned in Northern Ireland during the referendum campaign, pointing out the problems there would be. And people like me have been saying for 3 years that there is a logical conundrum here. If you have different customs policy, you have a different regulatory policy, you have to have a border. And now this is catching up with us. I think there are many people in the Brexiteer camp and those who talk about the border in Ireland being no different from the border between Camden and Islington, who really don't care very much about Northern Ireland, don't care very much about the situation there, and probably never been there. And I think that's a real problem.
Just a quick final one from me. The paradox is now that because of the backstop in and of itself, we could be heading to a hard border, which the backstop seeks to avoid.
Well, that's the conundrum of going out without any agreement. I personally don't believe we will go out without any agreement. I remember only too well the fuel crisis in 2000 when we were in government, when the government very nearly closed down. We virtually had to put emergency powers in place. And we went right behind the Tories in opinion polls the only time we did. Any government that takes us out without an agreement will fall within weeks. It is not going to be tolerable for the public.
Jonathan Powell, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
This is Beyond 100 Days and still to come. The Pope has given the first ever papal mass in the United Arab Emirates. We'll be hearing more from our religion editor coming up next.
والله بحضر أبغى كلور وما بقى نعرف وين نروح بحالنا هون أنا ما كنت اختلال
أنا بتوقم يا دا كلين بي كل عصب كلاب جنجق كداو أي جو ما ينجب سي جب سي جب سي
It's heartbreaking and it scares me because I want to be able to bring her home.
Our World is a unique series of films on the BBC, offering personal insights into global events.
هاي النتائج نحن اللي حققناها مو إنجاز إعجاز.
Our World, stories that speak for themselves.
In a world of complex global news stories, we'll sift through the information to bring you what matters most. And with reaction and reporting in real time,
Our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world.
you'll know what's happening around the world as we do.
And that these new measures won't actually stop Venezuelans coming over, it will just make the migrant crisis worse.
Whatever the story, we'll piece it together. Join me, Ros Atkins, for Outside Source on BBC World News.
20 years since Nigeria has returned to democracy and the country has been plagued by widespread insecurity, rampant corruption and an economy that's overly reliant on oil. How can the politicians vying for the top seats in government turn around the fortunes of Africa's most populous nation? Join me, Miney Jones, on BBC World News for more coverage.
Pope Francis has concluded a historic visit to the Arabian Peninsula with the first ever papal mass in the United Arab Emirates. Over 180,000 people went to it. The homily was delivered in Italian and translated then into Arabic.
At a meeting in Abu Dhabi with the world's top Sunni Muslim cleric, the Grand Imam al-Tayeb, the Pope made a broad appeal for Christian and Muslim leaders to work together to promote peace, with a particular focus on that awful war in Yemen in which his hosts have been playing a role alongside Saudi Arabia. The BBC's religion editor, Martin Bashir, is with me. Good to see you, Martin.
To see you, Chris.
Talk to me about the Mass today. This must have been the highlight of the trip.
It was. In many ways, it was like a pastoral visit, because in a population of around 9 million people, there are actually 1 million Catholics, expatriates mostly, working and living in the United Arab Emirates. But it very quickly became a diplomatic venture. Here was the Pope, alongside, as you said, the Grand Imam al-Tayeb, talking about the popular notion that religion is often conceived as a creator and a stimulator of war. And both of them issued communiques in which they jointly condemned religious-inspired violence and committed the followers of both Islam and Christianity to dialogue and peace-building. Let me just read you a couple of quotes. The Grand Imam's statement said, "I would like to address my fellow Muslims in the East. My message to you is to embrace your Christian brothers and sisters." And Pope Francis said this: "The time has come when religions should more actively exert themselves to help deepen the capacity for reconciliation, the vision for hope, the concrete paths of peace. We either build the future together or there will be no future at all." And what was interesting, I think, Chris, about this, here is the Pope acting as an international diplomat without naming any of the conflicts or any of the countries. And you think about somebody like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, or Viktor Orban in Hungary, or indeed President Donald Trump, who's going to deliver his State of the Union speech tonight, and no doubt is going to mention the building of a wall on the southern border. Here was Pope Francis appealing not to politics, but to ancient scripture about the way we regard each other. And what he was basically saying was that regardless of religion, ethnicity, nationality, each individual is made in the image of God. That phrase drawn from the first chapters of Genesis. And he was using that to challenge both people of faith and those without faith to work towards peace building.
Martin, briefly, he also, of course, touched on Yemen, mentioning the country by name and the war there that the host country that he was in is engaged in.
Yes, I spoke to one of his advisors about 20 minutes ago because they landed earlier today in Rome. And he said that this conflict in Yemen was weighing heavily on Pope Francis. Tens of thousands have been killed. Something like 16 million people are facing severe hunger. And Pope Francis said again in a speech, we must not follow the logic of armed power. And then he used these remarkable words. War cannot create anything but misery. Weapons bring nothing but death. And in the case of Yemen, I think we'd all agree that he has a point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unusual, of course.
Martin Bashir, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Chris.
As we said, the State of the Union here in Washington is a chance for the President to speak directly to the American people. Just like any major speech, it goes through lots of rewrites. One presidential advisor has told us that tonight's copy has been sharpied by the President quite a bit.
What's sharpied? Is that highlighted?
That's a word. It's a verb, it's a thing.
It's the important bits.
Okay, move on.
All right. So I'm clued up. It's about striking the right tone anyway, also trying to get a memorable line in there which drives the message home. Well, here are a few examples of that from the past.
Don't let anyone tell you that America's best days are behind her, that the American spirit has been vanquished.
The era of big government is over.
Terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
So what is the secret to writing a memorable State of the Union address? Michael Waldman penned 4 of them for President Clinton. He's now president of the Brennan Center for Justice. He joined us from New York a short time ago. There are only 2 lines from States of the Union addresses, and I have been following them for the last 2 decades, that I actually remember. One was from one of President Bush's, and it was, of course, the axis of evil. The other was one that you were involved in, and that was President Bill Clinton, the era of big government is over. When you wrote that line back in 1996, did you know that you had a hit?
Well, that was at a moment when there was a big debate going on between Newt Gingrich and the very conservative Republican Congress and President Bill Clinton and the Democrats over the role of government. It was actually more of a debate over first principles than you usually get. And he was trying to make the case that he was for a balanced budget but wanted to defend social programs like Medicare and Medicaid and education and the environment. There have been other moments in American history where these speeches have been pretty significant. Franklin Roosevelt articulated the 4 freedoms in a State of the Union address.
Michael, speechwriters are the forgotten heroes on nights like this, and you've been spending weeks and months, if you're in the White House, getting to know your subject, getting in the head of the president. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and in just a minute, tell me how you would write for Donald Trump.
Well, he's going. I'm not sure I want to be in that particular location, but he's going to no doubt try to say he wants cooperation, say he wants to reach across the aisle. You know, the problem he has is that the audience watching knows that he may well start tweeting angrily by the time he gets back to the White House. The one thing that I will be watching for, and I sure hope he doesn't do this, Ronald Reagan started this tradition of honoring heroes in the gallery sitting up with the First Lady. And they were sort of people who'd done great things and reflected ideals and values. Last year, and actually in a recent Oval Office speech, Trump used the same thing to have victims of crimes, families of crime victims, and we feel for their loss, but these were victims of undocumented immigrants. And it's basically a racist undertone, I think, an attempt to stoke fear in what otherwise is a fairly exalted and still somewhat revered place for Americans. It was really a change when he did it, and I hope he doesn't do it again.
I was reflecting today that he is a master of communication in the sense that he always knows the audience he's speaking to. So he tailors it for his base, he tailors it for the media, for his guest in the Oval Office, whoever it may be. Tonight, we're supposedly going to get this warm and fuzzy Donald Trump, and I'm not sure that really is the Donald Trump that we know.
You know, there's a sort of a presidential voice that you see in these speeches, and he's quite a communicator. When he has these bombastic rallies or these other things, he's obviously very, very effective. when he gives this kind of speech from a teleprompter, he can look a little bit like one of the robots at Disney World in the Hall of Presidents. You know, it doesn't look like a very naturalistic fit for him. But what will be interesting is watching the reaction not only of Nancy Pelosi sitting behind him, but the hundreds of Democrats sitting in front of him who will decide whether to cheer or grimace or applaud or whatever.
Michael Waldman speaking to us earlier. I went a bit kind of geeky on us, Christian. This is usually what you do, not me. And I dug out the whole line of that Bill Clinton 1996 State of the Union address. The era of big government is over, but we can never go back to a time when we go forward to being on your own. I can see why they stuck with the era of big government's over, right?
Yeah,
the rest of it.
It's a good one, isn't it? He doesn't conform to much, Donald Trump, but I know with all the eyes of the nation on him tonight, this is one event that he really looks forward to. And I will be watching you, as I say, Catty, and I'll be getting in the mood. And I was thinking how I might do that. And one of our viewers, because we have some very astute viewers, pointed me to the Trump collection. Do you know about the Trump collection? You can experience the world of Trump. I don't think that's him in the bathrobes there. But there was one thing that I found on there which maybe speaks volumes about the transatlantic connection there is, and it is the Scottish countryside candle, which you could light tonight in the studio, Catty. And I'll just read you what it says there. It says, evocative of the freshly manicured lawns at all our golf courses, the Scottish countryside candle will transport you to a relaxing day out on the course. Earthy and soothing hints of moss. That floats the boat. $55.
Yeah, I thought you...
$55 for a hint of moss.
Yeah, well, there you go, for a hint of moss.
Yeah,
but it's got Donald Trump's name on it. I thought that you were going to say that was you in the sort of fetch it. Anyway, I'm just not even going to go there. I hope that at 2 o'clock in the morning you are fast asleep. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I will be here in the studio for a BBC News special, listening to the President's second State of the Union address. We'll bring you the whole thing live, and then we will go over and dissect it and see whether any of those promises from last year have been kept, any more promises that are made this year, whether they're going to be kept as well. And Christian and I will be back here tomorrow to go over it all as well. See you back then.
Looking forward to that. See you then.